This is Closer by Dennis Cooper. Part 5. Alex, The Replacements. Alex, 17, is slouched in an old movie theater chatting with friends. Lights dim. He peeks at Cliff's crotch. As Explosives begins, damaged print, he feels torn between what he's observing, 4 wrestling hippies, and a sweet daydream, Cliff fucking him violently on a twin bed. The scenes get mixed up in his mind, like images in those light shows that stoned hippies used to project over rock concerts back in the late 60s. Alex pretends he's on acid. After a minute or two, the sex slowly dissolves in his eyesight. He watches one star topple back, hit his head on a rock, and stop moving. The hippies untangle. One puts his ear to the victim's chest, stares, shakes his head. Alex's cock is still hard from his fantasy. The actor playing the dead boy has freckles. Alex imagines his friends lug him into an alley, undress the corpse, then themselves, and gangbang him. In truth, the stars call for help, but the truth has already dissolved in this fantasy. When the corpse has been sapped by his former chums, and their inventive, if dated, incentives thin, Alex blinks. His cock deflates. A funeral is in progress. Some bad actors bawl, stagger, screech. The freckled boy lies in a box on a flower-strewn mound of dirt. No, Alex thinks. Reputation or not, this film's a yawn, however startling it might have been in the 60s. The corpse would be 30 by now, and the world's grown more hellish. A baby could see this and not feel the slightest bit dazed by its moral. Alex turns to Cliff. You want to leave? Cliff's eyes say no. Alex fights a desire to be fucked on the floor, then attempts to rejoin the film. What's Cliff seeing in it, he wonders, shifting his gaze back and forth from his friend to the huge square of images. 3 hippies kick a Coke can down a road. Cliff's eye movements don't match the actions on screen. Maybe it isn't the film he's enjoying, but some private story. Alex acquires an intense need to know, then this longing dissolves in more pertinent thoughts. For Alex, life is a series of gradual dissolves, one thought or mood or companion dissolving into another, over and over. It's a term he hears bandied about in his evening film workshop. The teacher will show classic artifacts, M. Potemkin, the Blue Angel, take a few steps to the right of the screen, and subdivide what the long-dead directors meant. As an experiment, Alex has tried to apply this idea to his life, remaining just to the side of whatever is taking place and narrating its course as though he were the voice of a rather pretentious spy story. The actors enter a hippie nightclub. They buy 2 beers. Cut to the bartender's face concentrating on pouring their drinks into glasses. Alex would like to poke Cliff and explain how the film's tempo makes this switch possible without disturbing its slight credibility, but Cliff would stare, shake his head, and not know what that meant. He's too easily swept up by surface activity, rushed from one view to another, his blue-green eyes glazed, his mouth deformed by a meaningless smile. Hypothetically, Cliff would be distant acquaintance material. In person, Alex cannot take his eyes off the guy. Alex shoots Cliff a glance. So, imagine the guy's a total stranger, he thinks. What's my knee-jerk reaction? He narrows his feelings to lust and disinterest. Fine, where do they spring from? Cliff's face. What about it? The way its mysterious beauty dissolves when George Miles is the topic. George provides content where Alex would rather hallucinate freely. 2/3 of his weekly allowance is spent buying drugs to undermine George's spell. After a joint or two, George disappears to a certain extent, and Cliff's eyes sport a flexible stare again. Alex's thoughts trail off. The film attracts them. Its hippie actors have formed a collective of some sort. They march down a quaint main street, carrying signs with dumb slogans and crudely drawn peace symbols. But in the meantime, their dads have formed a gang of their own, wielding shotguns. Before the young stars can change the world, they're sent to prison. Alex peers over at Cliff, who is lost in a daydream. His pupils aren't even bouncing around anymore. They sit perfectly still, pointed down, and looked vaguely wet. George, Alex sneers to himself. Dissolve. Alex is thinking about the relationship between his life and film's version of life. At first, his thoughts are too scattered, then they gravitate to the project he's soon to embark on. As part of his evening class, he must direct a short film. It's a requirement, as well as a good chance to focus his thoughts, which are weak in the storyline area. His fascination with Cliff, sex, and violence suggests a kind of 60s-styled light show, transposed to the present. He's juggling lots of ideas. Porn scenario, B-movie parody, rock opera, pseudo-snuff, others. They need a center, a theory, a sense of belief. He believes in the power of film to sanitize the unthinkable. But such a crosshatch must seem to reflect one clear viewpoint, and Alex feels very divided, as though his self and his self-understanding were merely atop one another, with no sense of how they might coalesce, much less attract an audience. This needs intense thought. Luckily, the boring film is dissolving at last. The boys and their fathers relax in the nightclub scene earlier, sipping tea. The end, it says. The words obscure them. Alex turns to Cliff. I'm going. Alex rolls onto his back and bends his knees, encircling them with one arm, until the crack in his ass widens and lifts a foot off the bed. The rest is up to whoever. He didn't catch the guy's name. In fact, he's wondering if his decision to go home with Blondie was logical. He'd had a few drinks on the guy's tab. The bar was peculiarly empty. He'd been amazed by the sound of the Jesus and Mary Chain, a covert pop group, mixed in with the flightier disco. Something transported him here, ripped his shirt off trying to take it off. He watches the face he'd been grinning at all evening eat out his crack as though it were a scene in a porn tape he's renting. If that were the case, he could judge his sex partner more clearly. As is, he's too distracted by personal traits and sketchy fragments of history. They came out over drinks and remain an issue now, when everything but good looks should be pointless. Alex knows, for example, that Blondie's attracted to freckles because they remind him of pennies strewn inside a wishing pond, his favorite memory of childhood. He fixates on asses because they're so rounded and pond-like. Slobbering over them seems to refill his more dried-up emotions, or something like that. For Alex's part, he has always felt very detached from his freckles. When strangers make a big deal out of them, it just confuses him. What's he supposed to say? Skin's skin. What's the point of decoding it? Freckles aren't painful. They don't crackle when touched, as dry leaves would do. They're not reminders of anything, like scars. This blonde's fascination with them has no bearing on him. Occasionally a tongue disappears up his asshole, and he feels involved, though it's still kind of vague, like he's passing the scene of a crime and gets hit by a stray bullet. He picks up one of the blonde guy's porn novels, which they'd been perusing to get in the mood. It's called Chicken Lickin'. The cover art is an incompetent sketch of a boy on his hands and knees, bracketed by two distorted men. One has his hand in the shape of a gun, and is pointing it at the boy's ass crack. The other man aims his cock at the boy's mouth, which grins or grimaces. The men are absurdities. Arms too long, cocks like cannons, hands withered. The chicken's malformed as well, buttocks overinflated, his eyes reminiscent of bullet holes. Alex opens the book and reads a passage at random. Toby's ass was public property. Whitey looked hard down its steaming tube. He may be young, Whitey hissed, but he's got a real hellhole. Pedro stroked his colossal dong. Hot mouth, too, Whitey added. Hot stuff at both ends. A line of spittle ran down his chin. And good enough to be eaten, I'd say, he winked, shoving his face between Toby's soft ass mounds. Eat me, Toby cried huskily. Clean it, you fucker. As Toby spoke, his pit slowly relaxed. Whitey gulped down its dark, hidden fruit. I would pick that page. Alex tenses a bit at the memory of Cliff's boyfriend George in the same situation. In fact, at 3 steps removed, first enacted by strangers behind glass, then filtered out through his friend's vague account, then overlaid with wretched prose. The scene that embarrassed him during Cliff's story seems much more intriguing, a fiction dissolved of illusion. Alex's eyes, which have narrowed in irony, flit to the drama between his legs. As an experiment, he tries to master the tone of the novel, in order to silently ornament his experience. The blonde stud pushed harder with his darting tongue. Oh, that's ridiculous. Curling the rough muscle into a pointed tool that pushed my sphincter, forcing it to relax as my tight ass mound opened. Oh, that's awful. Accepting the stud's wet caresses with a proud lunge, I guess. It was, marked by a cry of relief from my parched lips. Let's see. A whimpered sigh of surrender as my whole body relaxed, gladly taking this anal intrusion. Shit. Hungrily ready for more, ready to take this blonde hunk in any... Shit. Alex stops for a second. I have to do better than that. Okay. The blonde wormed his tongue up my shit chute. That's better. I've struck gold, he said in a muffled voice, swallowing thick wads of ass-tinged saliva. Good. You're hot, really hot, he continued, addressing my gleaming hills. He stroked his hard-on so roughly he could have been signing his name on a contract. That's funny. My pink butthole widened with each probing lunge of his lick muscle until the hole was humongous and rubbery. God. Say, ah, I moaned. God. He did. Then I loaded his mouth with my rancid brown... Alex has managed to come, and by doing so, seem half involved in the sex, but his calves ache. That wasn't bad, he says, wriggling free and standing up in one motion, then recovering his clothes. Enigmatic, not too complex, quick. He smiles down at his partner and finds the blonde rubbing his eyes, either tired or disconsolate. I really hate it when people use words to describe an emotion, the blonde sniffs, then sobs quietly. Alex wipes cum onto a handful of Kleenex and steps through the wobbly holes in his shorts. Mind if I take this? He picks up the novel. Look, he continues, we used each other. It's over. You've got things to do. I've got things to do. Period. That does the trick. The blonde tumbles onto his stomach, shoves his face in a pillow, and kicks his lower legs, swimming instructor style. Alex is barely involved in the formalities of dressing, chatting, waving goodbye. His experiment with the pornography haunts him. Its tone and his eyesight have merged, like his film teacher's knowledge of plot seems to do with a weathered print. Somewhere amidst this consolidation is a great work of art. I can't picture it, he mutters. I need a blank wall. He fumbles around for his car keys. He lies in bed, notebook propped on his lap, scribbling. Spread around him are various magazines, open to pictures of muscular bodies, stripped nude, roughly fastened together. Running alongside each shot is an X-rated storyline, added on later, that tries to explain their disjointedness as violent, mutual hunger. But Alex knows they're actors. What the text presupposes has no more connection with them than they have with each other. It's these gaps that Alex keeps glancing at. They're what his scrawl is about. Alex enters his math class and picks a clean seat. The teacher writes giant numbers across the front blackboard. Students open their notebooks and copy them down. One, a boy sitting 2 seats to Alex's left, is excessively pretty. He should be a chipmunk, Alex decides, leaning forward to scrutinize. Draw a few rings around the eyes, dye his hair, make him lose a few pounds, and he could be George Miles on a good day. Well, close enough, Alex thinks, lowering pen to page. He scratches wildly, stops, studies his stuntman, then blackens some more of the notepaper. George made men's mouths water. And I know why, the boy muttered. He snuggled low in the couch, grabbed his legs, and raised them high in the air, so his pants grew real tight to his ass. It stuck out like the prow of a pirate ship. Drool dribbled over Cliff's chin. I just knew it, George thought. I'm going to give him a taste. He bent his knees, which ripped the seat of his pants open. Cliff was there in a flash. He completed the job, shoved his face through the frayed cloth. Here it comes, babe, George grunted. Alex runs out of ideas. He shakes his head to dissolve the absurd voice. His stuntman comes into focus. The boy tilts sideways in his chair, trying to suss out what Alex was writing. The boy squints for a while, then gives up and casts curious looks in his schoolmate's direction for the rest of the class. When the bell rings, he gathers his books and strolls over. I'm David, he smiles, sticks his hand out. I know, Alex says. You're the retard who thinks he's a pop star. The boy's hand withdraws. These are notes for a porn film. You want to be in it? The boy stiffens. Something tells him to walk away. He gets lost. Alex is hustling down the hall, notebook spread out like a map across his arms, rereading his porn, when he notices George Miles a few yards ahead. The kid's scrawny ass does its limited trick, jiggling slightly. Thanks to Cliff, Alex can't see it without getting jealous. He quickens his pace. Hey, Miles, he says. Got a sec? They retreat to a small square of grass in the heat of the school buildings. I'm directing a film and I want you to star in it. George is apparently too stoned to comprehend. Cliff plays your lover and... Alex debates for a moment. He eats your, shit. He has managed to animate George's face, but its expression lacks depth. He starts again with the addition of several provocative details, the thrust of which, payment in drugs, evokes the needed response. George clears his throat. Cliff's my lover? When Alex nods, the boy's grin makes him seem almost human. You said a film? Sure, when? What drugs? 5 minutes later, Alex is strolling away toward the school cafeteria, a little vacant with happiness. With George as bait, Cliff is sure to see worth in the project. He fills his tray with a sandwich, some french fries, and orange crush, then walks through the long, crowded tables. There's Cliff's handsome face, chewing something up. Alex imagines its mouth smeared with shit, and his cock hardens. Christ, he thinks, I'd better cool myself off. He tries to picture a vast crowd of startled film critics. That doesn't help, but his blue jeans are fairly loose. Hi, pal. He sits and announces his project's beginnings, allows himself to be slapped on the back, then pops the question. No, Cliff says. Alex rephrases the question several times. Each time, Cliff makes up a different excuse, although the excuses are standard. Disgust, guilt, embarrassment, decency, all of them somewhat negotiable. They obviously hide a more boring concern. You're still in love with that twerp, Alex crows. No, Cliff responds. That's the past. But there was something there, and you're making it... Alex's thoughts trail off. He must decide how to salvage his project. He forces a smile, wanders into his gym class, and goes through the motions of hitting a baseball. You're out! Alex plops on the bench between someone he knows well enough to say hi to and someone he hates. He watches the pitcher's grand style of delivery, then the bored outfielders shouting things back and forth, then the immense chain-link fence that circumscribes the campus. Just beyond, walking slowly along some parked cars, is a former A student, expelled for possession of drugs. Alex had sex with his brother once. Its nuts and bolts were disastrous. Kenneth looked so frail that Alex was scared he would break something. Still, 4 months later, when Kenneth had dropped dead from some kind of brain cancer, Alex was glad he'd gone through with it. Ring, Hey, genius. Cliff rushes his way through a crowded hall. I've got a thought, Cliff continues, wrapping one arm around Alex's neck. They veer toward the shade of an elm tree. Why don't you shoot the real thing through Philippe's window? It's up your alley. Besides, you could art it up in the editing room or whatever you call it. Alex yawns. I'll even show you the place, be your cinematographer. Alex nods, yawns. When he yawns, his mouth opens extremely wide. Someone once told him it looks like he's crying wolf. He walks Cliff to biology class. As they chat, the film assembles itself before Alex's eyes. Cliff's particularly sharp, or some drug has inspired him. He talks about fucking George in such blasé, edgy terms that he could be describing the plot of a porn magazine. Once they get to the crossroads, there's quite a rapport. Alex stops dead. When we finish the shooting tonight, let's fuck, he says. Cliff keeps walking. When he's a few yards ahead, he shrugs. I'll take that as a yes, Alex yells. Thanks! He runs to astronomy. Alex creeps through the foliage. Shh, says a voice just behind him. Straight on past the... Yeah, just a foot or two further. You're there. I'll be back at the car. Alex gets to his feet. As Cliff explained, there's a neat little space between bushes and window, where he can stand comfortably, kept dark by the crest of damp leaves overhead. He fiddles around with his light meter. The room is nightmarishly lit. He plugs one eye and frames the black and white furnishings within the fractured square etched on the lens. Philippe and George perch on facing chairs, 5, maybe 6 feet apart. He can just fit them in. George's body is nothing apart from his crotch, which resembles a mouse. His head sways on top of that vague streak of whiteness, a kitsch souvenir, its lips and eyes the unnatural colors of candies. Alex pans to Philippe. Too much skull, he thinks. It really swallows the face. What few details there are seem generically French. Sharp-featured, unshaven. From the neck down he's fat, and to Alex all fat is identical. I'll try to improvise now and write the real porn stuff later. He uses the lens as a monocle while the kid takes a few tipsy steps and collapses face down on the carpet. Okay, well... He eyed George's ass. It lay in front of his chair like a footstool. That's gotta be the worst piece of flesh I've ever seen, he thought. Drool dribbled down his chin. Jesus, you'd think I was starving to death. He almost laughed at himself. He stuck out his foot and kicked it. The fucker's real enough? He started wiping one hand back and forth on his big, veiny cock. Listen, baby, he said. Keep your mouth shut. He planted one foot on each buttock and pushed the crack open, licking his lips at the hairless pink slit. You could mount that thing on a ring, he joked. He knelt down, reached behind him, and found a small flashlight. He parted the ass crack and aimed a bright beam at the red cavern. You're pointless, he growled, looking over its glossy walls. I need a snoutful. He did a sharp nosedive and smelled something rancid but rich, like the trace of perfume in a king's tomb. He flattened his face on the butt, sucked and chewed at the hole, but his treasure was stuck in its vault. He introduced a few fingers. They twisted the tube in an interesting way, but not wildly enough. Fine, have it your way, he said. Don't give me what I want, but you'll be sorry, kid. He started slapping the ass with ferocity. He laughed out loud as the pert globes turned purple and twitched into ugly shapes. This'll teach you to mess with me, he thought. The skimpy body was tossing around like a beached fish. The sight made his prick leak. I've landed the boy of the century, he thought. No shit. Man, those sunken eyes, that runny nose, those chapped lips. He gave his hand a rest. You get my point? He said firmly. I want the goods, George. A lovely thing like you shouldn't have some ugly junk up your ass. I'll take it off your hands. Get me? The stud poised his face by the glowering mounds. A prize emerged, ripe and hot from its bowel oven. He caught the brown morsel between his teeth. Wiping his fierce, sword-like prong into a frenzy, he gulped the abhorrent meal down in one bite. "Just like Mom used to make," he sneered. As a reward for the youngster's behavior, Philippe gave the ass a quick tongue bath. "Good as new," he surmised with a wink. "Now, let's complete the job." He fit the huge, sopping head of his love muscle to George's pucker and worked the entire 7 inches inside. "Oh, you're the loosest one ever," he groaned. Arching his hips, cock touched bottom. When he withdrew, it was covered with crumbs. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," Philippe chanted, increasing his tempo. "You're gross." And it wasn't too long before gobs of cum plummeted into the wimp with a noisy splash. Cut. When Alex gets back to the car, Cliff has locked its doors and gone to sleep in the back seat. He bangs on a window. Cliff lurches up, slurs some words. They sound like, "So, what did you think?" "Banal," Alex says, starting the car. Even as porn, there's so little to work with. For all the mystique of the shit, Philippe's sex has a regimentation, as if it's been too well thought out or performed once too often. At this point, it's all in the telling. Cliff's snores interrupt him. He drives off, turns left down a street lined with huge, ostentatious homes. It's late, so they've blended together. Only their top floors, in 1 or 2 cases, are still lit, like watchtowers. Suddenly there's a very dark stretch in the row on the right. He puts his foot on the brake, rolls his window down. Legend has it this house has been empty for decades, since the depressed father killed his 2 kids there. No one will touch it. Occasionally, lunatics claim they've seen transparent children run into the street like they're chasing a ball. Alex has long-standing dreams to use its grounds for a big-budget splatter film. Sometimes he drives here alone, parks, and sits on the curb for a couple of hours, taking notes. The basic line he's come up with has 3 or 4 drunk teenaged boys sneaking into the place. A psychotic, deformed guy is using the house for his hideout. He spots the intruders, makes chase, rapes and murders them one by one. It's a conventional plot, but the rapes make it fresh. At the moment, he's too tired to do more than stare at the gate. Once he gets bored with that, he turns to see what position Cliff's sleeping in. "Home," he commands himself. The road is straight but looks tapered, a shiny sword aimed at his neighborhood. When he's exhausted, he's prone to seeing daydreamy mirages out there on the route. Since his thoughts are a mess, it's a real 60s light show. He tries to separate Cliff from Philippe, from himself, from George, the sexy parts from the dreck, and at the same time keep just between 2 white lines. When a truck pulls in front of him, he's far too busy to notice. When he does, he puts his foot on the brake a half-second too late. Alex is slumped in his wheelchair. "I was asleep for a week. When I woke up, He lifts the front of his t-shirt. Using a finger, he draws a jagged line across his stomach. "Below that's the vulture meat," he says. "Go ahead, kick it, shoot it or something." Cliff reaches out, pokes his friend's knee. "Zilch," Alex sneers. "I'm a seat pad. My nephew was visiting yesterday and he climbed into my lap and said, 'You're pretty comfortable.'" Just then a teenaged boy screams from the TV. It draws their attention. A shadowy figure is stabbing him over and over. "That's the worst look of terror I've ever seen," Alex says. "I've been okay," Cliff mumbles. Alex turns, startled. "What? Oh, right, I heard. Spotless." He knows he should look at Cliff, but his eyes naturally flit to the TV instead. Long dead, the teenager is still being hacked. To simulate blood, a red light has been trained on the body. It can't hide the trick knife, whose blade recedes into the handle with each thrust. "Either these films are becoming more shoddily made," Alex groans, "or my eyesight's improving." He takes a big hit off his joint and hands it over to Cliff. The shadowy figure slips out of the door of what looks like a haunted house, inching along an old canopied porch toward a window. 5 boys are standing inside. "Don't ask me, man," one says. I didn't ask you. I told you, Bob. Alex, I feel sort of guilty. My not being hurt, I mean. What? Oh, don't worry. Alex smiles, watching the shadow observe the young actors. At least I don't feel like castrating your boyfriends. Plus, this film, it just absorbs me. Glass breaks. The shadow yanks at an actor, then severs his head on the splintering pane. The gore is replaced by a girl's face. When you chew gum, chew the best. Alex rolls to the TV and turns down the volume. Don't worry, he says. I'm more advanced now. Remember those creatures in Star Trek who'd gradually evolved over millions of years into gigantic brains floating in deep space? He lifts his shirt, points to some freckles. Look hard. You might see Orion. Cliff snorts, but his eyes remain wary or quizzical. Alex adds. I know. I'll read your mind. He feigns a sort of religious trance, eyes rolled back in his head, fingers pressed to his temples. What has become of your film, right? Cliff nods sheepishly. Wait 15 minutes, Alex says. This stupid thing's almost over. He cranks up the volume, withdraws a few feet from the set. Boys are scampering everywhere. One pixie-ish kid, who has spent the film cracking bad jokes in a bid for the other guy's sympathy, hides in a closet. I'm fine, he gasps, sinking down to the floor. Mom, Dad, you won't believe this. Alex tenses. He pictures the skin being torn off the kid and gobbled down like a pancake. The closet door shatters. A knife cuts the kid's throat in close-up. Gee, thanks, he gurgles. Alex wheels to the TV again, grabs his guide, and finds the listing. We still got another half hour to go, he groans. No way. He turns down the volume and faces Cliff. So, you weren't hurt at all. That's great. I mean, I can hardly imagine your hot body squishing all over the place. No, God's choosy. Here, have a joint. Cliff catches it. You don't look so bad, he says. Give me a year, Alex grins. I'll settle. He lowers his eyes to Cliff's crotch, which produces a tingle in his upper half. It feels like a prickly shirt. He points at a gray film can lying on top of his Sonic Youth bootleg LP. It's finished. My dad drove me down to the lab and I sliced a few awkward transitions. Cliff clears his throat. Well, the porn narration, how... Oh, that was simple, like fishing probably is. I sat at my desk and thought of what I dreamt up at the window. My arms started jerking, and suddenly there was this primitive thing on the table. In fact, he creaks up to his desk, pulls drawers open, removes the file folder. Maybe you'd read this to make sure it's sexy. I checked it against some porn, and they appeared to match. He watches Cliff squint at his handwriting. He has that prickly shirt on again. He is imagining them in bed now, here, tonight. He rearranges their bodies until something works. He thinks of that film Coming Home, where Jon Voight played a paralyzed Vietnam vet who had sex with Jane Fonda. He's sure both their faces were sweaty and creased, same as porn stars. It's clever, Cliff says. Making George seem a corpse is inspired, and he does sort of turn into one when you're with him. The night we fucked, I had this weird feeling I was alone and not alone at the same time. The shit part works because he used the right adjectives. But if I actually saw shit come out of George, I'd still feel nauseous, I think. Alex frowns, considers this, then says, I used to have a real clear mental picture, but sex, shit, they're not all that different now. Speaking of which, Cliff looks up. You remember our plan for the ill-fated night? Cliff averts his eyes. Alex traces his gaze to the face of a dying young actor. A nervous voice, which doesn't sync with the wrenched lips and chattering teeth of the victim, says, I'll try. Alex smiles at the face. He directs his old friend through the preparations. First, the light switch. Next, Cliff removes his own clothes. Alex watches him fold back the bed covers, ripping them clean from the mattress. Cliff reaches Alex, wraps both arms tightly around his chest, and raises him to his feet. Resting his weight on Cliff's shoulder and head, Alex fumbles around with his buttons, snaps, zippers. Cliff carries Alex, half lifting, half dragging his heels on the carpet toward the bed. "Thanks," Alex says, as Cliff straightens him out, then rolls him onto his stomach. "Lube's in the drawer." Sometimes Cliff's hand strokes his back very rapidly, as though attempting to rub out a stain. Alex wonders if he should pretend it's a rape, and is beginning to cry when Cliff sighs, "I just can't get it hard." Alex considers this, then reaches over and takes a porn magazine off the small stack on his night table, hurling it onto his back. He hears the pages turn. They feel like wings. "Hey, great. I'm in." Alex can't tell the difference. He looks at the TV. The shadowy figure lies dead. A handsome actor steps back from the thing, drops his knife, and squints into the lens of the camera. "The end," it says. The words obscure them.